Borag Thung, Earthlets, and welcome to the 2000 AD Thrillcast. And on this episode, we're returning to San Diego Comic-Con for our romance and horror panel. Well, welcome to another episode of the 2000 AD Thrillcast Earthlets. I am your host, as always, Mulchar, and on this episode, we're returning to San Diego Comic-Con for the second of our three panels. This one was on horror and romance. What a pairing! Because we were talking about Misty, which is the special that came out in July, which was the horror. And Roxy, which is our successful Kickstarter, which is the romance. And we were joined by Gail Simone, by V, by Abz Harding, and they were talking to journalist and critic Rosie Knight about their mashing up of these two huge genres. So I'm not going to linger for too long. I'm going to get you onto the panel. It's another audio-only panel, so sorry, YouTubers. But it's absolutely fascinating discussion about how these two genres work. Their similarities, their differences, what you can do, what you can't, etc., etc. So thank you so much to all the panelists and to Rosie for an absolutely fascinating discussion. As always, we will see you in 2 weeks' time for another episode of the 2008 Thrillcast, where we'll, fingers crossed, be bringing you the Simon Bisley and Kevin Eastman panel, where they talk about working together in the 1990s, about 2000 AD, about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So that was that was another great panel from San Diego. I'm going to be in Portland this week for Rose City Comic Con, which I'm very much looking forward to. We've got Simon Bisley there signing copies of the incredibly popular Slain the Horn God collection, which has just come out. The 3-volume hardcover is gone, so absolutely pick up a copy of the oversized paperback while you still can, Earthlets. Available from all good comic stores and also our web shop. So until next time, Earthlets, take care of yourselves, enjoy this panel, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. I mean, assuming that I survive going to Oregon for a few days. And until then, take care of yourselves and Splendid Verthrig.
Hello, everybody. Oh, hi. That was a very loud hello. Hi, guys. Appreciate you deeply. Welcome to this delightful 2080 panel. And we're going to talk today about horror comics and romance comics and a really cool Misty relaunch that we have, as well as just the kind of comics that we enjoy. So, this is an incredibly talented panel of guests. I am Rosie Knight. I'm going to be your moderator, and I'll allow the panel to introduce themselves, starting at this end, if you don't mind.
Okay. I'm Gail Simone, and I'm a writer, and I've written probably right around 700 or so comic books. I also work in video games, television, and I just finished my first prose novel, which is due out in November. And I'm a huge fan of horror, romance, and humor, all things that are unpredictable, hopefully when they're done right. And that's what I'm up to.
I'm Abigail Harding, and I am the co-creator of Ask and Mercy and the writer, artist of Parliament of Rooks, which was Eisner nominated this year. Both titles.
Congratulations.
Oh, thanks. Both titles are with Comixology Originals, and I can say that the physical trades and the singles for Parliament of Rooks will be starting with Trim with a Blaze publishing in October.
Woo!
I'm Ram V. I'm a writer of comics and games and prose and film and TV as well. You might know my work from books like The Savage Shores, Blue and Green, The Many Deaths of Layla Starr, or some of my DC Marvel work, like I've been writing Detective for the past couple of years. I've written some Venom and Carnage, so lots of horror, lots of humor, and some romance thrown in between.
Bram, I'll actually start with you. You are, as you said, you're a bit of a genre man.
Sure.
Do you remember the first time that you read a comic that scared you, or that you read a horror comic that left an impact on you?
First time might be pushing it, but I do remember reading a lot of the Sandman volumes when I was about 19. That's kind of what brought me back into comics. I'd read all of the Flash Gordon and Mandrake stuff when I was a kid, and then I just stopped. I think my dad recommended I read some real books for a while, so I was doing that. And then 19, a friend of mine gave me the first volume of Sandman, and I distinctly remember the bit with Dr. Dream, and there's this cafe where he's sort of, his powers are invading other people's dreams, and I remember being truly affected by that sequence. So yeah.
Yeah. Same question to you, Abby.
Well, I came into comics, or rather I fell into them, maybe about maybe 12, maybe 12 years ago. I started reading with manga originally, and I would have to say, when it came to the horror comics, I'd say Gaio really affected me. I mean, I've got, Junji to insane, but Gaio really affected me. That I know it affected me because I had a nightmare after I read it. It was, those creatures and the shark. I think, being in a situation you have no control over it, and you've got this entity coming after you, and there's no reasoning, there's no it's just drive, and it's crazy to me. Like, it's all this environmental tragedy about it. Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah, Gaia was really affected me. It's crazy. Even now I think about it. Oh, all those fish. I can't cope with it.
Gail.
For me, I think horror started really young with fairy tales. Because I think that looking back on it, I didn't realize it as a young girl, but I was much more interested in the horror side of the fairy tales than I was the princess being saved and live happily ever after side. That was more interesting to me. And in fact, my first story that I consider that I ever wrote, I was in 3rd grade, and it was a horror story.
Wow.
And I had just learned I love science and all of those kinds of things, and I had just learned that starfish's stomach comes out and envelops its prey and sucks it back in and dissolves it. And so to me, I was like, ooh, that's amazing. So I had this giant star creature come up out of the ocean on the beach, and I live on the Oregon coast, and the stomach come out and envelop all the tourists and suck them in and dissolve them. Which my teacher found very interesting compared to all the puppy dog and rainbow stories that she was reading. But it created a reaction in her when she read it, and I really liked that, and I was super shy. Had terrible social anxiety, and that was how I learned to kind of communicate, was I could get a reaction from people and start a conversation with these stories. And then I think it went from that to, my mom liked gothic romance stories and with some horror in it, and then Stephen King, and eventually we got to Sandman and Swamp Thing by Alan Moore, and Sandman, of course, by Neil Gaiman, and EC Comics, all those kinds of stories. So it's just something that's always been there, I think, since I was being read fairy tales.
Yeah, I think Grimm's fairy tales are a very underrated gateway drug into horror for kids.
Also, the original versions are way more horrific than
and that's what I read as a kid. I didn't get the watered down Disney versions.
No, it's not even that. It's like when you had nursery rhymes at school. I mean, I remember. I did do this myself. I used to, ring a ring of roses, pocket full of posies, that's the plague. And the kind of the darkness, and and it's even creepier when the kids, you know, they play on it in the horror films, and you know, when the kids are doing that, singing about really grim stuff.
The truth behind nursery rhymes exposed.
It's like in The Wicker Man in 1973 one. And you've got like the kids with the doll, and they take the evil out the village, taking the evil out the village, and it's just, you know, stuff like that. When you know, when it's like you know, child, you know, with the child. Like taking part in what is like really, you know, songs and stories about, you know, really dark tales from the past, or, you know, lessons to be learned, like, you know, the Grimm brothers and everything. It's, you know, it's crazy.
Yeah, that actually leads me perfectly to like one of the questions I was really interested in asking you guys. You mentioned like when we watch a horror movie, like, you know, Freddy Krueger, they have, you know, the song 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. They have jump scares. They have these kind of devices. But as creators, how do you make a comic scary? Because you don't have a lot of those devices like jump scare or the oral experience of it. So like, Ron, what do you put into a horror comic to kind of make it that thing that's gonna make someone say, yeah, this is horror, this scares me?
Yeah, I mean, I think people make a huge deal out of the sort of effectiveness of jump scares just because films and TV is so pervasive, but no one ever asks if a novel can give you a jump scare or not. Like, there are great, phenomenal horror novels that don't do that. I think the key, and this is, I think I'm quoting John Carpenter when I say this, the key to good horror is to trick people into scaring themselves. Which I find to be like really, really insightful, because what you want is, I think the horror really in a lot of these stories comes from a consequence that you know is inevitable, is going to happen, but you don't want it to happen, and you are quite invested in the characters and you're frightened about what is going to happen to them. And so that sense of expectation being built up is really, even jump scares is about expectation. And so when you're writing a comic or a script or a novel, I think sort of almost manipulating / managing expectations and using the tension between what people want to see and what people are afraid to see, I think that kind of stuff is more potent to me, and that's the kind of horror I like. Like I'm not really affected by the sort of slimy, gory things jumping out at me. So I think people being concerned about things is the root of horror.
Yeah. Do you want to go?
Well, you can go if you want.
I would. I mean, with Palom the Rooks, it was a build-up, and it really kind of started to. It came to the climax kind of halfway, like because it's 5 issues. But in 3, it really kind of like I had to basically bring this all of this tension up to a point, a bit like you know, Dallas in the Air Duct in a you know it has, you know, with like creature features you get to see the entirety of the creature, but you've only seen snippets of it or like you know, like hints of it throughout like the first few minutes. But I kind of would just like compare it to I've forgotten the name of the artist, but I can actually see the art, but the dog that's staring at the door frame, but the door is open and it's just black. Like, to me that kind of encapsulates the tension build up in an image. Like, you know, images can say 1,000 words, and with, you know, horror comics you can literally have pages where you've got like liminal spaces, you've got you've got the character like moving through the pages, but there's something unsettling about it. It is quite achievable in that sense that drawing and kind of, it's almost like a loud silence, as it were. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, art for me with horror, it's always been a bit more loud than quiet. Yeah.
For me, like my series Clean Room is, I would call it a psychological horror, but there's a lot of creepiness and scariness visually in that series as well. And so basically the premise is that this global, woman who has a global organization, self-help organization, feels that you have a secret that she needs to pull out of you, and she has this clean room that's way below ground that you have to completely be sterilized and all your piercings removed and everything to go into, and then she's going to pull this out of you. And just that idea, I think, is scary to anybody just listening to it, because what kinds of traumas and secrets is she going to pull out and make, real in this room? And then a lot of people, if they get out of the clean room alive, they're never the same. So what happens to them through this process sometimes is very scary. And also in comics, we have lots to work with, and everything is very, I don't know if you guys would agree with me, but with writing Clean Room in particular, it's very intentional and very everything that I've thought about. And then when I hand it over to the artists, then they add to it. But we've got panels, and we've got these blank spaces between the panels, and I very much count on the reader to fill in those spaces between each panel with their own imagination. It just amps up the scares more and more and more. And then we can start with, I have a scene where there's this really horrible person, and you're reading what he's saying, and then you turn the page and you see what he's created, and it's very terrifying and disgusting and horrible. And I would consider that a jump scare, but it's a visual jump scare in a comic book. It's not something that you expect, and it's really important to have twists too, so that if the reader is reading one thing and they're anticipating a particular thing, that you don't give them that always. Sometimes you need to have a twist, and that can be really scary to you, because your brain logically goes one way, but it's very scary when you make it go a different way. So it's just that unpredictability, that manipulation of the reader is just really important, I think, in horror.
Yeah, and also there's tons of things you do with repetition and juxtaposition as well. I remember in Blue and Green, I had a whole page where a jazz saxophonist is moving his tooth back and forth, because as they play a lot of saxophone music, like a lot of jazz musicians tend to lose their teeth. And so just this act of moving the tooth back and forth while he's talking about his history with his mother, just a 9-panel grid of a guy pulling a tooth out, it can become extremely horrific. And then, to talk about the juxtaposition stuff, you start looking at sort of correlated images, like a man's hand on a saxophone while he's playing it also looks a lot like someone's hand on somebody else's spine when they're holding them. So stuff like that,
Yeah, I love that. And Gail, I'm really glad you brought up the idea of like the page turn as a jump scare. Because I do think in comics, if you build up that atmosphere and then you have that thing, if you're reading that in a quiet little room, you can kind of get so immersed that it does terrify you.
Well, and you're requiring the reader to participate. In a film, you are participating, but really you're just watching and you're being fed everything. But when you're reading a comic or reading a novel, you are participating. Your own imagination is part of this process too, and I count on people that are reading this stuff to have really good imaginations that will scare them even more than what's on the page.
Yeah, I think when it comes to jump scares and things like that, you have to really be strategic with the pages and the way they land, and obviously the page turns. And I do in the third issue of Palomar Rooks, there's like a chase scene, and then it's really intense, and then it goes into kind of full-on body horror. And I remember some of my friends, they had read the issue and they said it was the best issue because the plot was just driving it. And things just got like everything just started to escalate and seemed almost out of control. I mean, I specialise more in the kind of monstrous body horror stuff, so making stuff look really disgusting, and the process of a human body transforming into a giant monstrous bird and making it look as uncomfortable as possible, because, you know, body horror is, you know, that it's playing on the idea that, you know, you kind of you know, almost putting yourself in that position and feeling that yourself. And, you know, I mean, there's some things about body horror that I'm a bit squeamish about as well. And, you know, it's like, you know, the fingernails, you know, and, you know, like the eyeball thing in Clockwork Orange, you know, it's something that makes you shiver and kind of like, you know, the tingling feeling. I think that's part of the horror, is making the reader react.
Yeah, the empathy of like, oh, what if that was happening to me? How would that feel?
Mm.
Yeah. And Gail, I was going to ask you as well, so with Misty, which if you guys don't know, Misty is like a really wonderful, this is the Misty 2024 special. Misty's a really wonderful vintage British comic that was like horror comics for girls, and people kind of forgot it existed in 2000 AD and now able to publish new iterations. So Gail, was it something that you'd come across before, or was this something new, like when 2000 AD came to you?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, in the back of my mind, it had probably crossed at some point. And I love these kinds of things. But when they approached me and asked me if I was interested in writing a Misty story, and they sent materials for me to go through, and then I just like devoured them and said, and then when I answered back, I said, no, I want to write all the Misty stories. Because I just fell in love with the character and the potential, just, you know, immediately. And now we announced a couple days ago that there's, after these this issue, which I have 3 stories, and then there's a story written by another talented writer and drawn by a talented artist. There's going to be 4 full Misty comics with a different story in each one. But yeah, the concept is so open and beautiful, and I'm able to, because she wasn't really fully, what I would call fully developed, because she kind of was a host of horror comic, then I get to add a lot to her and play with her throughout time. And we are doing, you know, we have the capability to do punk horror, gothic horror, sci-fi horror, and I'm just really intrigued by taking Misty in those directions so that we can play with the little subgenres within the horror genre as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. And something that I love about Misty is it does have that kind of romantic quality, like visually. The art's very beautiful. It's often very gothic. So it's exciting to kind of see you guys bringing that into a new age. And I was kind of thinking as well, like with gothic horror, you mentioned that your mom would read gothic romance and stuff. And this is also a panel talking about romance comics, so that was a very professional segue by me. But Bram, I was wondering, like, did you ever, romance comics was something that I came to later. Like, I didn't know until recently when I would go into the back issue bins and stuff that, like, Jack Kirby did romance comics and Steve Ditko did romance comics. And actually there's been romance comics for as long as there's been any other genre of comics. So Ram, have you kind of had any experiences with romance comics? Like, is it a genre that you've kind of looked into or found something that spoke to you in it?
Would you consider Archie's as romance
Definitely.
comics?
It's one of, I would say it's one of the legendary romance comics.
Yeah, great. I grew up reading a lot of Archie's Digest that would be available in India. Comics that were available in India were quite limited, but there was tons and tons of Archie's around. So I would read them, and then, you know, I was also that sort of early teenage age to where the whole sort of Betty, Veronica, and Archie situation was like very nail-biting for me. So yeah.
Yes, still to this day, will they decide who he's going to be with? Never. It's not like
And that Reggie, that
that Reggie, that's scary. Abby, what about for you, like that kind of romantic element in comics? Because it's definitely something where we're seeing more we're getting the chance to get more romance comics now, but is it something that you've kind of been interested in, or that gothic nature, bringing that into your horror?
I would say it was pretty recent for me, I'll be really honest. I've always been quite into the more supernatural and the actual event taking place. The romance always took more of a secondary aspect, but it's kind of changed as I got older. And I'm always like looking for new stuff to read, so like I can't really think of anything right now.
Oh no, it's fine. I mean,
But
there's so many comics
you
in the
know,
world.
every day's a school day. I didn't know that saxophone players can lose their teeth.
Yep.
Kind of
So I've learned.
info.
I mean, I go by.
Isn't that horrific?
It
So
is.
horrific.
It is. I mean, you know, every day, you know, I go by. You've got to learn something new every day. So I would. The whole aspect of romance for me, especially with what happened with like the tail end of Ask for Mercy, and to be honest, even with Rux, it had more of a Romeo and Juliet vibe to it,
Tragic
more of a
romance.
tragedy, yeah. And it's also very hard, in a sense, to. I mean, I'm being very honest here. I've never been in a romantic relationship, so actually being, you know, writing romantic fiction or romantic gothic horror, I'm going off having witnessed other, you know, how my parents were together, or how some like friends and partnerships. You know, it's something that you know. I remember Richard Starking said to me, like, you know, some of the greatest, you know, love songs were written by people who hadn't actually been in love because they were, you know, yearning for it. So, I mean, for me, I'm quite still new into it, and I'm always looking for some more titles, some more like literature, even more comics to actually kind of learn a bit more from. So, I mean, being here on this panel is, you know, it's been really informative.
Well, I
to hear.
appreciate you sharing that so much.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't quite completely answer that question.
No, that's a really wonderful answer. Thank you so much. And also, I think something that I found really interesting that I never really considered is like, so one of my favorite comics is Love and Rockets, and I'd never really considered that a romance comic until I started being in more circles where, for a lot of people, the Maggie and Hopi romance in that is one of the most formative romance comics of all time. But a lot of times when we think about it, it's more of that direct 50s style, a lady on the front, and she's like, please, like, don't leave me, or, you know, and I collect those comics, they're absolutely fantastic.
I used to sneak Mills and Boon's novels out of a neighborhood bookshop where I wasn't allowed to, but the covers were like, I'm gonna take that home.
Yeah, I mean, some of those covers are so incredible, the painted covers.
Yes, that I was appreciating the quality of the art.
Quality of the painting, for sure.
I just remembered one romance or one kind of, you know, one true pairing, really, you know, the MTP, that I did enjoy reading, especially when I started reading Doctor Strange, was his relationship with Clea.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just so, that is like the most, you know, they were all over each other. And then when it was written that they were going to go through a divorce, they haven't seen each other, I was like, oh my God, it's like, yeah, like, I can relate to that a little bit because, you know, parents and everything, mine are divorced, so I saw it. So, you know, that whole, the drama and lending, you know, the stakes of the romance, and if it's in a horror back setting, you know, that romance is under threat.
Yeah, I love that. And that's a really good call on the Doctor Strange and Clear, because I think that's one of comic books' great romantic pairings.
I'm so glad we're back together. I really am. So glad.
You're someone who's gotten to do all kinds of comics in all kinds of genres. So what to you is like is a great romance? Like, what do you write when you want to write?
First of all, Love and Rockets is a great romance comic, and also Strangers in Paradise by And I think, even though I mentioned Alan Moore's Swamp Thing as a horror comic earlier, I think it's also romance, because Abby and Swamp Thing, that's a great different kind of romance that I found very interesting. And like my mom, as I mentioned earlier, read the Gothic romances and stuff, and she didn't monitor my reading material growing up, which is one thing that I really am thankful for her for. 'Cause and so with regular romance stories, I became quickly bored because they just seemed too predictable. Mm-hmm. The women were always in the same position, and you all know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So, so it just wasn't for me after a very short period of time. And it's only other than like Love and Rockets and Strangers in Paradise and stuff, it's only now that I'm starting to get more interested in it, because we've got stronger characters in it with the variety of stories and variety of everything, and that's much more appealing to me. But right now I'm writing Rogue and Gambit in Uncanny X-Men, and it is so hot to write this in their southern outside of New Orleans, and kind of with the southern Gothic vibe to that whole book. And I'm just having the best time writing their relationship.
Yeah, that must be a lot of fun, especially because you're taking on a pair of characters that people just love so much.
Yeah, they do. And I think that romance really works really well too. And not that it's not going to be tested, but it's just really smoking, and I'm enjoying it. And it's nice to be able to write stories and tell stories and have that type of content in a mainstream comic and not shy away from it anymore, So I'm really happy to do that. And again, it's, for me, when you tell any of these kind of stories, the unpredictability of it is what's gonna keep people wanting to read about it, I think. See where it's going.
Love writing Lois and Clark.
Yes, and I like the writing Lois and Clark. When I was writing action the first time, Lois and Clark were married, and so I got to write that relationship, and I just thought, man, if you were married to Superman and he'd come home and fly you to the Great Wall, and you could sit there and hold hands and look at the moon, this would be the best. So it was just taking what could happen in that relationship that couldn't happen in any other relationship. I just really loved that whole thing. Or he'd go off, be fighting something in Africa, and bring her back her favorite buns from a tribe there, and it's just really fun to put in those little sweet things amongst all the saving of the world.
The saving of the world. Ram, is there is there like a couple that you would love to write in comics? Like, do you have a Lois and Clark?
I mean, I've already.
Strange and Clear?
I started off, since we're talking superhero stuff, I started off writing Catwoman. So there was already that sort of Catwoman Batman mechanic there, and that sort of forbidden attraction, if you will, because she's a villain and he's a hero, and he has to. And then when I was writing detective, I wrote Batman and Talia.
That's a complex relationship.
Yes, and if there's if the amount of passion you evoke in the reader is any sign of success, let me say that the Batcat and Bat-Talia fans are very passionate. But I mean that's the beauty of it, right? Like, to me, the thing that I really enjoy about writing in general is I love watching people. I love observing people. And and when I write them as complex people. And I think the beauty of romance really is as a mechanism that drives people to do very, very silly things. And the great part about fiction is you're trying to write these characters in ways that you would expect people to behave. So because they have to feel real. but then you also want them to do completely ridiculous things. And so romance is great in that way. So I've written that couple. I get to write Big Barda and Scott Free now with New Gods. And that equation to me is great because she's like this badass kind of I will plow through walls to get what I want kind of person.
Very tall.
Yeah, very tall. And he's like
lady.
and he's like a bit of a kitten where he's like I can escape. That's about what I can do. So no, I love it.
Have you found that? I believe that the Scott and Barda shippers, they are also another passionate fandom. They love their short king.
As I will discover, I am sure.
When I was writing Wonder Woman, I had her have a relationship with a human man, and I created this courtship that was from Thymoscara, so it was part of her culture, which she had to do to court him. And I have spoke so many times at universities and all over the place about that particular part of the Wonder Woman run because it's great for gender studies, it's great for politics, it's great for all kinds of things because, you know, there's panels where she's holding him upside down in her arms, like a lot of role reversal stuff is in there, and it was really fun to try to imagine what it would be like if you were Wonder Woman and you were dating a normal human man.
I'm like, she could really date anyone, but a normal human man. That's
right. And you had to be worthy too, but anyway.
Just normal men?
Normal men. Just normal men.
What
do you mean just normal men?
Classic British the legendary normal man. I should have just had like a cameo. Abby, seeing as we were talking about, you know, we've kind of recommended some romance stuff. As another body horror lover, I would love to know, like, what if people kind of heard you talking about that and they were like, oh, that sounds really grotesque and scary and wonderful, but I don't really know about body horror. What are some of your picks that somebody would have to watch or read or explore?
Cronenberg's Fly.
Yeah.
Because it's so damn great. And also the fact, you know, it's not just, he's literally, even in his personality and his, you know, what he's doing, you know, it's a man transforming into a giant fly. I mean, it's like, the cut in Palomarosa is like this guy just decides, you know, turns into a giant bird, as it were, but he's not. He's actually quite weak. It's his tiny girl. It's his girl, the princess, who's the powerhouse here. But I'd say another great body horror would be I would say even Videodrome as well by Cronenberg. To be honest, all of his catalogue. To be honest, I would highly recommend. And to be honest, I always loved how in The Fog, the original Fog, I mean, that's more of a ghost story, and I love how that starts, but, you know, when you see the ghosts turn up, and you kind of see all of like all the gangrene and all the rotting flesh and everything, and but it's just hints, but it makes the viewer really start to send their imagining into overdrive. And I think when you have like snippets of that, and especially like if you're translating that into comics, you're teasing and you're being mean to the reader, but it's a really good way to kind of send their imaginations into overdrive, and a lot of that work the reader ends up, it makes more of an impact. I'm trying to think of another one.
Those are great. Cronenberg's whole
Cronenberg's whole vibe,
very good. Yeah, go for it, Ron.
I found Elephant Man, David Lynch, really affected me. And it wasn't the kind of like unexpected genre horror that you would think of, but it was just the horror of the consequence of things that happen to you, you know?
It's been around forever. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And then we've got The Thing. That really scared me. I a lot to
Yeah.
think that you could maybe get some kind of a something
Yeah.
that would do that to your body. You know, could happen
That's
to anyone.
another great imagination
Yeah.
one. It's
Yeah.
the fear of what if you couldn't trust the people around you.
Right.
And then more recently, Annihilation
Oh,
as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was saying about when you said, Gail, about Jekyll and Hyde. I watched recently. I mean, it's on YouTube, so guys, you can go and watch it. I highly recommend it. The Jekyll and Hyde from the 1920s with John Barrymore in it, and how his face. I don't know. I mean, he's called The Profile, like that's his name, but the whole. How they use, I mean, it's why I love black and white cinematography. You can do magic, like it's literally magic tricks. How Barrymore how he distorted his body, his face, and then there was very little makeup involved. But when you first saw that transformation in that one shot, to be honest, it's up there now. Having watched it, I mean, this 100-year-old film, and the way it's told, even if it is like a silent film, it really impacted me.
That's very effective.
It's like I can't remember the name of it, the Twilight Zone episode with the devil, and how they used light reactive makeup, but because it was in black and white, you could have this face seem to transform in one shot on screen as the camera's rolling. It's just because they changed the camera lighting from like maybe red to green, because the makeup reacts to that lighting. So I always found, even if it isn't full-on gross body horror, when you've got somebody transforming on screen, or in that way, and especially that one shot where he's like crawling, like you just see his head, but he's like moving towards the screen. I found that so damn disturbing when I watched it, and from a film from the 1920s, at the height, got German expressionism going on as well.
What a time.
It's one of the biggest inspirations for me. Just that visual storytelling and just the body language that got me, because it was just so unnatural. Yeah.
Well, when they do that in American Werewolf in London, where you're seeing like the entire process, things crack and open up and teeth growing, and it just is so.
Yeah, those practical effects really. I think a lot about, it's not like it's more of a romance actually than a horror, but Legend with Tom Cruise and Tim Curry as the devil. Like when I was a kid, the practical effects they used on him were like so scary to me. I still think about that when I think about character design to this day.
Did anyone watch Last God, I think, or Mad God?
Mad God, the Phil Tippett stop motion movie.
Yeah, it's stop motion. It's
We have a few
such
head nods.
effective.
Got a few head nods.
Yeah, it's such effective
It is on
horror.
Shudder if you want to watch it.
Just absolutely phenomenal stuff. I had never expected to watch something in stop motion that would make me physically cringe. Just amazing stuff. Yeah.
Even the Pingu and the Thing mashup, that's like a YouTube relic now.
Pingu Thing mashup? No, I have not seen this.
Well, I'm gonna have to. Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing it running around when I was in like. I wouldn't even like to say how
you're
old the
ruining
video
my
is.
childhood.
No, I wouldn't even like to say how old that video is, but yeah, like Pingu and the Thing, like somebody just went out their way and just made a whole kind of like, if Pingu was in the Thing and he had to deal with everything that Kurt Russell had to deal with,
really
and it's a parody, but it's just so well done, and I mean it's all done with plasticine and still just so cringy, like it makes you like, oh my god, but it's so great. It's so great.
Okay, before we end the panel, what's the comic that you've read recently that's kind of impacted you the most or affected you the most? It doesn't have to be like a standard horror, but if there was something that just really left you. Mine was Nice House by the Lake, which I was just rereading those two, and the kind of like scope of it and the way it mixed up like interpersonal horror that really left me with I think about it a lot, even as I'm kind of
for me, both of them are manga. One is Monster and the other is Tomie. Those two, just the concepts, everything through them is just terrifying.
I think mine would be More. That was, I think it was with Boom Studios. I did a cover gig for them, and I have to admit, when I got it when they pitched it to me, I was like, oh my god, this is so up my street. It's kind of like a very folky, very Wicker Man, like in the sense of, you got this commune of women on this island, but there's some really, really weird stuff going on. And like it's more like deep sea eldritch horror involved, and it really was like, it was incredible. It was just so, it was amazing, especially with the body horror elements. It was fantastic, and like the slow transformation and everything. It's definitely up there. It really just left an impact on me, that one did.
I'll avoid the obvious answer and instead of talking about Junji Ito.
Read everything by Junji Ito.
The gazillionth time. I will pick, and I'm not easily scared by comics, but I will pick Strange Embrace. David Hine did a book called Strange Embrace that he wrote and drew. I think it's one of the finest horror comics I've read.
Would you guys feel comfortable with people answering?
Yeah, that's fine.
If anyone's got a question, just pop your hand up. And yes, Magneto, I believe.
Hello, Magneto.
The helmet's here.
Okay.
Hi guys, thanks for talking. I was just wanting to ask, do you find about romance and horror? Do you find that you can find horror in love, or is horror just in lust? Because my favorite horror movie is Hellraiser. That's more about the dangers of lust and wanting pleasure. How do you find that the idea of love itself could be horrific in your own right?
No, I think if you look at the classic ghost story, that was always based around the idea of romance or unfulfilled love or denied love or unrequited love, and it goes back to the idea of people are willing to do ridiculous but also terrible things in the name of love, or because they love someone, or because they feel slighted by someone that they love. So very recently I watched a Japanese horror film called Kwaidan, which has the first story in it is called The Woman with the Black Hair, I think, and it is a story about a husband and wife who are dearly in love, but the husband is unsatisfied with his life, and so he decides to leave her behind in pursuit of greater fortunes, sort of realizes the error of his ways and comes back, but she has died, she has passed away, and he is forever haunted by her ghost after his return. Now that's a straight up love story with a very tragic ending. So.
I think that you could do a very horrific love story with two people in love, but maybe the control is in a strange place. I think, if you take a relationship that two people that are dearly in love, but one is more, completely controlling the other, or wants the control, or who doesn't have the control, I think you could tell a lot of horrific tales with just that, thinking about that by itself.
Yeah, I'm totally agree.
What happens if you try to get out of that relationship, and what happens if you try to stay in it? That could be very horrific.
Does anyone else have any questions? Hello.
Hi. Could you just actually tell us a little bit about the actual Misty and Roxy comics? Like, are they going to be quarterly?
Steve.
That's a Steve question.
Steve question.
Oh no, I'm cameoing. So Misty is a one-shot comic that's coming out at the end of next month in America. But it's then going to be followed next year, this is just announced at this convention, by a 4-issue miniseries also written by Gail, which is going to come out in 2025.
Alright.
Roxy is a romance comic from the 1950s, which we've also brought back, and it is currently running as a Kickstarter. And it's an anthology with stories of people like Erica Henderson, Max Assancio, Joel Stone, Nadia Shamas, covers from Tula Lote, Marguerite Sauvage, Hannah Templar. and that one it hit its funding goal, so it's going to happen. It just hit its second stretch goal, I believe, as well. And then that will be then released into stores, hopefully, later on this year.
Oh, thanks, Steve. That was very
Nice.
informative.
Well done, Steve.
Well done.
Yes, Steve.
Thank you for the question. That's a very important question. Any other questions?
Oh,
Oh, then I believe we can finish on time and make this, make the volunteers here, who, by the way, thank you so much, volunteers. Thank you all so much for coming.